Flight director
and we'll continue to work through
Destiny
as
flight
the
team
mission
have now taken over.
for crew begin their
We'll continue
unpacking
to work through
procedures
as
and get
the
to
mission
settle in
mission
aboard the
crew
International Space Station.
begin their
The
unpacking
now orbiting lab with
procedures and
11
get to
members
settle
on
in
board currently
aboard
in
the
their
International Space
midday
Station.
meals and midday processes of their workday before
on board currently in their
transitioning into
midday
the back half of their
meals
day
and
and
midday
settling in
processes
for,
of their
what
workday
will be a
before
good night's sleep after a
transitioning
very
into
eventful
the back
morning
half of their day
for
and
us here
settling
in
in for
Houston, Texas,
what will be
as
a
well
good
as
night's
those that
sleep
followed
after a
along
very
in the
eventful morning
Joint Operations
for us
teams in
here
both
in
Axiom Space,
Space,
also
also
here in
here in
Houston,
Houston,
as
and
well as those that followed
SpaceX
along
in
in the
Hawthorne, California.
Joint Operations teams in both Axiom Space, also here in Houston, and SpaceX in Hawthorne, California. A little more than 10 minutes away from welcoming remarks of the Axiom Mission 4 team as they settle into the International Space Station after arriving earlier this morning. Docking to the International Space Station occurred at 5:31 a.m. Central Time, and then roughly 2 hours later, the hatches would open to welcome in the 4-person crew to join the Expedition at 73 team. And that welcoming remarks will feature all now 11 members of the crew on board. And the first remarks from first-time flyers in Axiom Mission 4 pilot Shubhanshu Shukla, Swavesh Uznansky-Vishnesky, mission specialist, and also mission specialist Tibor Kapu. And for commander of Axiom Mission 4 Peggy Wilson, a hearty welcome home to the International Space Station, and now her 5th flight of her career. For Peggy Whitson, the most experienced U.S. astronaut in history, began this mission with 675 days under her belt, 9th all-time, but will continue to add to those incredible historical numbers as the Axiom Mission 4 and its crew will proceed with an approximately 2-week mission aboard the orbiting laboratory, performing outreach events and research investigations, participating in around 60 of those investigations, representing 31 different countries. This is Mission Control Houston as we continue to monitor and anxiously count down to the welcome remarks of Axiom Mission 4 aboard the International Space Station, now inside 10 minutes to those remarks as the now 11-member crew aboard the International Space Station getting settled in and preparing before radioing back down to the teams on the ground in both Hawthorne, California, and 2 members here in Houston, Axiom Space and, of course, NASA at NASA's Johnson Space Center and the International Space Station Flight Control Room. Currently, the SpaceX Dragon Grace that brought the Axiom Mission 4 crew to the International Space Station together, connected, currently orbiting over the northern portion of the Pacific Ocean. They are in an orbital nighttime period, and we will bring you those exterior views once the station and spacecraft emerge into the orbital sunrise and orbital daytime. But until then, we will continue to track as the crew preparing for those welcome remarks now inside 10 minutes. This is Mission Control Houston, as we are now 5 minutes away from the formal welcoming remarks as the International Space Station has introduced, or will introduce, the members of Axiom Mission 4 formally after having docked to the International Space Station earlier this morning. They would dock to the orbital outpost at 5:31 a.m. Central. After pressurization and leak checks would occur on both sides for both the teams inside the Dragon Grace spacecraft and inside the International Space Station, the hatches would be open to welcome in the four-person crew at 7:14 a.m. And we are now tracking for an 8:35 a.m. Central Time welcome remark. So a little bit more than a few more minutes away as the teams aboard the International Space Station currently settling in. It is the midway point of their day today after they were pressed into action early, as the arrival of Dragon would have them press right into their daily activations. For NASA astronaut Nicole Ayers and Anne McLean, they would oversee and monitor the progress of the Dragon spacecraft to the orbiting laboratory and execute those hatch opening ceremonies or procedures, pardon me, and then, of course, all 11 members of Expedition 73 were there on the other side to welcome in Peggy Whitson, Subhanshu Shukla, Swavesh Uznanski, Vishnevsky, and Tibor Kapu to the orbiting laboratory. And there you see the spacecraft, newly named Grace, docked to the International Space Station. And that is where they will reside for approximately the next 2 weeks, as they will participate in around 60 research investigations, numerous outreach activities, and more, representing 31 different countries, as the International Space Station has now welcomed its 4th private astronaut mission. It is their first since Axiom Mission 3 would arrive to the International Space Station, and that would be back in January of 2024. And just out of view, you can somewhat see the nose cone. If you look to the bottom left-hand side, just past where that Dragon spacecraft is, that is another Dragon spacecraft, Dragon Endurance, at the forward port of the International Space Station in the Harmony module, as both Grace and Endurance flying in front of the International Space Station, 2 of now 5 vehicles that are attached to the orbital outpost. Also Soyuz MS-27 that brought NASA astronaut Johnny Kim to the International Space Station, and 2 cargo craft, Roscosmos Progress cargo craft, also attached to the International Space Station. So a full house, both externally and internally, on the orbiting laboratory. We're approaching about 10 minutes until the welcome remarks for Peggy Whitson, Subhanshu Shukla, Swavesh Uznanski, Vishnevsky, and Tibor Kapu. One of the traditions for the Axiom missions and the private astronaut missions is the pinning of the newly minted astronauts. For Peggy Whitson, she'll be placing those pins on Subhanshu Shukla, Swavesh Uznanski, Vishnevsky, and Tibor Kapu. For them, this is their very first space flight and very first mission to low Earth orbit. After the welcome remarks, they will jump right into their activities, whether it is unloading the Dragon spacecraft or for the Expedition 73 crew back to their work schedules before settling in for the evening, and then hitting the ground running tomorrow. And for the Axiom Mission 4 team, that would be day 1 of their approximately 2-week mission aboard the International Space Station. And to take a look back at the activities for Axiom Mission 4, they would lift off from Launch Complex 39A at NASA's Kennedy Space Center yesterday morning at 1:31 a.m. Central Time, carrying Whitson, Shukla, Uznanski, Vishnevsky, and Kapu to low Earth orbit. And that is where, on the first time, Dragon spacecraft would announce the name of that spacecraft in Grace, and then proceed into their burns. They would execute a sequence of 5 major burns and a couple of adjustment burns to help raise Dragon's altitude and help close the gap between the spacecraft and the International Space Station, those being the phase, boost, close, transfer, and co-elliptic burns. And that Dragon spacecraft would continue to perform nominally, and actually in its first flight, swimmingly, and all the way to the key waypoint markers and milestone markers, including the approach initiation burn, which would be executed earlier this morning. From there, they would go through 3 different checkpoints or gate processes: waypoint 0, waypoint 1, and waypoint 2. But that Dragon spacecraft and its alignment with the International Space Station pretty well fine-tuned. Only a brief pause at the waypoint 2 mark after moving through waypoint 0 and waypoint 1. And while 20 meters away, they did a quick hold, saw that everything was A-OK, and continued to proceed with that soft capture and contact that would come at 5:31 a.m. Central Time. From there, Nicole Ayers and Anne McLean would begin the hatch opening procedures, while the team aboard the Dragon Grace spacecraft would also execute their arrival procedures. And shortly, about an hour and some change later, at 7:14 a.m. Central, the hatch would be open. The pathway from the International Space Station and Dragon spacecraft would be opened up, and that is when Peggy Whitson, Shubhanshu Shukla, Swavesh Uznansky-Vishnievsky, and Tibor Kapu, and a wealth of smiles and glad handshakes and hugs will be passed around as they have now upped the population of the International Space Station to 11 members. We continue to proceed towards the welcome remarks about 8 minutes from now, and we'll be sure to turn over all communications to the audio and video team as we will await the Expedition 73 crew and Axiom Mission 4. Of the 11 members, 6 nations now represented aboard the International Space Station of Hungary, Poland, India, the United States, Russia, and Japan.
Station Houston on Space Ground 2 for Johnny.
Hey, Eva, I can take it.
Yep, yeah.